They used to whisper when Hana Park walked past. Not loudly, never loudly. Just enough for her to hear. She's too slow. She panics under pressure. Why would they put someone like that in trauma? Hana kept her head down and her voice soft. She triple-checked charts. She accepted the worst shifts. When alarms screamed, her hands trembled, and that was all anyone ever noticed. They didn't notice that she always stood closest to the exits. They didn't notice how her eyes tracked movement instinctively. They didn't notice that she never, ever froze when blood hit the floor. At Harbor Crest Medical Center on California's windswept coast, where Silicon Valley executives and Pacific surfers ended up when things went wrong, silence was mistaken for weakness. Dr. Nolan Reeves made sure she knew her place. "You're here to follow orders," he reminded her often, his voice carrying that particular condescension reserved for nurses he deemed beneath him. And Hana nodded, because arguing had once cost lives she still dreamed about. For 3 months, she absorbed their mockery like scar tissue forming over old wounds. She organized supply closets no one else would touch. She cleaned bedpans without complaint. She became invisible in the way prey animals do, still, quiet, unremarkable. But invisibility is a survival skill. And survival skills are learned in places most people never see. Then came the night the ER drowned in chaos. A multi-vehicle pileup on Highway 1, where the Pacific Coast Highway curves like a lover's promise before it betrays you. Metal twisted. Lungs collapsed. Hearts failed. The kind of carnage that turns even seasoned trauma teams into scattered pieces of panic. And while doctors shouted and protocols crumbled, Hana saw something no one else did. Something subtle, something deadly, something that meant a man would die in minutes if ignored. She spoke once. They ignored her. When the patient crashed, everything changed. Because Hana Park didn't just save his life with a procedure most trauma surgeons would hesitate to attempt. She did it with the kind of precision that doesn't come from textbooks. It comes from doing the impossible when failure means your teammates don't come home. And when a Navy helicopter descended onto the hospital grounds 12 hours later, rotors shaking the walls like an earthquake, armed men in tactical gear flooding the halls, everyone finally realized the truth. They hadn't hired a fragile nurse who couldn't handle pressure. They had unknowingly employed one of the most dangerous medical professionals the U.S. military had ever trained. A woman who'd kept Navy SEALs alive in places so classified, even their bleeding was redacted. And she was done staying quiet. Hana's morning routine at Harbor Crest Medical Center was designed to be forgettable. She arrived at 6:47 a.m., early enough to avoid the morning shift overlap, late enough that the night nurses were too exhausted to make conversation. Her scrubs were pressed but plain. Her hair pulled back in a tight, practical bun. No jewelry except a simple watch with a second hand she never actually needed to look at. Her internal clock was calibrated to heartbeats and respiratory rates. The locker room smelled like antiseptic and exhaustion. "Oh good, Park's here," someone muttered from around the corner. The voice belonged to Jennifer, a veteran nurse whose 20-year tenure gave her license to cruelty. "Maybe she can organize the supply closet again. It's about all she's good for." Scattered laughter followed. Hana closed her locker with a soft click. She'd learned early that reactions were invitations. Silence was armor. She checked her badge, Hana Park, RN, Harbor Crest Medical Center, and headed to the trauma wing. The California coast outside the windows was beautiful in that particular way that belonged to places too expensive for people like her. Harbor Crest served the wealthy and the wrecked. Tech moguls from San Francisco who drove too fast, tourists from Los Angeles who didn't know the local currents, fishermen who'd been working these waters for generations. Dr. Nolan Reeves arrived at 7:15 a.m. in a cloud of expensive cologne and self-importance. He was the kind of handsome that knew its own value. Sharp jaw, practiced smile, the confidence of a man who'd never been told no by anyone who mattered. At 42, he was the youngest department head in hospital history. His office had a view. His parking spot had his name on it. His authority was absolute. "Park," he said, not quite looking at her. "I need someone to restock Trauma Bay 3. Make sure the intubation kits are properly organized this time." "Yes, Dr. Reeves." "And Park." He finally looked at her, his expression somewhere between pity and contempt. "Try not to hover during morning rounds. You make the residents nervous." She made them nervous. Not him. Never him. Hana nodded and disappeared into the supply room. The morning passed in familiar patterns. She restocked shelves with mechanical precision. She updated charts. She responded to call buttons. She became part of the hospital's infrastructure, as noticed as the oxygen lines in the walls, as appreciated as the fluorescent lights overhead. At 11:30 a.m., she ate lunch alone in the staff lounge. Jennifer and two other nurses sat at the main table, their conversation deliberately loud enough to carry. "Did you see her hands shaking during that code yesterday?" Jennifer said. "I swear, Park freezes the second things get intense." Reeves was furious, another nurse added. Said she's a liability. "I don't know why they hired her," the third one chimed in. "I mean, I'm sure she's nice, but trauma requires a certain toughness. Some people just aren't built for it." Hana chewed her sandwich slowly. Turkey on wheat. No mayo. She'd learned to eat food that didn't require tasting. Her hands rested on the table, steady as stone. They shook sometimes, that part was true. But not from fear. They shook from the effort of keeping still. From not moving the way they'd been trained to move. From not reacting the way muscle memory screamed at her to react when chaos erupted and seconds became the difference between breathing and dying. In Kandahar, her hands had moved so fast they blurred. In the Hindu Kush, they'd worked by feel alone when the lights went out and generators failed. Off the coast of Somalia, they'd sutured arteries while bullets punched holes in the helicopter's hull around her. Her hands didn't shake from weakness. They shook from the monumental effort of pretending to be weak. At 2 p.m., Dr. Reeves led rounds with his usual theatrical flair. He stopped at each bed like a conductor before an orchestra, gesturing dramatically as he explained diagnoses to wide-eyed medical students who hung on his every word. "Note the presentation of acute cholecystitis," he announced at bed 7. "The patient will require immediate surgical consultation." Hana glanced at the chart, then at the patient, a 63-year-old woman with the wrong pain pattern, the wrong fever curve, the wrong history. "Dr. Reeves," Hana said quietly, "her pain is radiating to her back, not her shoulder. And her amylase levels." "I'm sorry, did I ask for your opinion, Nurse Park?" The room went silent. Hana felt the weight of every eye in the trauma wing. "No, doctor. I just thought." "That's the problem." Reeves smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. "You're not here to think. You're here to follow protocols. The residents and I will handle the diagnostic work. You handle the bedpans." Scattered nervous laughter from the medical students. Hana lowered her eyes. "Yes, doctor." But she didn't move away from the patient's bedside. Later, 6 hours later, when the woman finally got the correct diagnosis of pancreatitis instead of gallbladder disease, no one apologized to Hana. No one even mentioned her name. That was the invisible tax of being right while being powerless. At 9 p.m., Hana's shift ended. She walked to her car, a 15-year-old Honda Civic that started on the third try, and sat in the darkness of the parking lot for exactly 5 minutes. This was her decompression ritual. 5 minutes to remind herself why she was here, why she'd chosen this, why she'd walked away from the only thing she'd ever been exceptionally good at. Because in California's coastal hospitals, no one died while she held pressure on their wounds and whispered promises she couldn't keep. Because quiet nursing meant she could sleep occasionally without the sound of rotors and gunfire. Because normal was supposed to feel like relief, not suffocation. She started the car and drove home to her studio apartment in Marina del Rey, where the rent ate most of her paycheck and the walls were thin enough to hear her neighbors' entire lives. She showered, ate instant ramen, lay in bed staring at the ceiling, and tried not to think about the fact that the only time she felt truly alive was when everything was falling apart. The thing about workplace bullying in hospitals is that it rarely looks like bullying. It looks like professional feedback, constructive criticism, necessary hierarchies. It wears a white coat and speaks in medical terminology and hides behind the sacred excuse of patient safety. Hana understood this perfectly. On Tuesday morning, Dr. Reeves called her into his office. "Close the door, Park." She did. His office overlooked the Pacific Ocean, endless blue water that stretched toward horizons she'd once flown over in helicopters that didn't officially exist. The walls displayed his credentials. Harvard Medical School, Johns Hopkins residency, published papers with his name in bold. No photos of family, just achievement after achievement after achievement. "I've received concerns," Reeves began, his fingers steepled like a TV lawyer, About your performance during high-stress situations. I see. Multiple staff members have reported that you seem overwhelmed, anxious. There was an incident last week where your hands were visibly shaking during a code. Hana said nothing. I need to know that my nurses can handle the pressure of trauma work. This isn't a quiet medical floor where everything moves slowly. Lives depend on split-second decisions and steady hands. The irony was so thick she could taste it. I understand, Dr. Reeves. Do you? He leaned forward, his expression softening into something worse than anger, pity. Because I'm trying to help you here, Park. Maybe trauma isn't your calling. Maybe you'd be better suited to pediatrics or geriatrics or even administrative work. There's no shame in knowing your limitations. There it was. The gentle suggestion wrapped in concern. The kind offer that was really a threat. I'd like to stay in trauma, Hana said quietly. Then you need to improve. Significantly. Reeves pulled out a form, a performance improvement plan with her name already typed at the top. I'll be monitoring you closely over the next 30 days. Any sign that you can't handle the pressure, and I'll have to make alternative arrangements. She took the form. Thank you for the opportunity, Dr. Reeves. His smile was magnanimous. That's what I'm here for. To develop talent. She left his office and returned to the trauma floor, where the invisible walls closed in a little tighter. The rest of the week followed a pattern she recognized from basic training. Break them down before building them up. Except here, no one planned to build anything back up. Wednesday, Jennifer assigned her to clean contaminated equipment, a job typically rotated among junior staff. Since you're so detail-oriented, Jennifer said sweetly. Thursday, Dr. Reeves questioned her medication dosage calculation in front of the entire morning shift, even though her math was flawless. Let's double-check Park's work, he announced, just to be safe. Friday, a patient's family complained that the Asian nurse seemed nervous and requested someone else. Reeves accommodated them immediately, never asking Hana for her side of the story. By Saturday, Hana's hands were shaking more frequently. Not from stress, from rage. The kind of rage that came from being exceptional at something and being forced to perform inadequacy. From knowing exactly what needed to be done in any medical crisis and having to wait for permission from people who knew less. From being capable of things these civilian doctors couldn't imagine and having to hide it like a shameful secret. She'd kept men alive in austere conditions that would make this hospital's challenging cases look like paperwork. She'd performed emergency cricothyrotomies in sandstorms. She'd cross-clamped aortas in moving vehicles. She'd been the difference between an operator going home to his family or going home in a flag-draped box. And now she was being lectured about hand tremors by a doctor who'd probably never seen actual combat trauma outside of textbooks. But this was the bargain she'd made. Normal life meant normal limitations. Safety meant silence. Peace meant pretending. On Saturday night, she sat in her apartment and made tea. Green tea from a Korean grocery store in Los Angeles where the owners knew her grandmother's hometown. The ritual was meditative. Boil water. Steep leaves. Pour slowly. Focus on the present moment. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You left something behind. No context. No signature. Hana stared at the message for a long time. She'd left many things behind. Equipment. Friendships. A version of herself that made sense. The muscle memory of being the absolute best at something that mattered. She deleted the message and went to bed. But sleep didn't come easily. Instead, memories did. The helicopter's interior was dark except for red emergency lights. Hana's hands worked by feel alone. Clamps, sutures, pressure, more pressure. The SEAL operator's face was gray under the night vision glow. His name was Mitchell, or maybe Morgan. They never used real names in the field. Stay with me, she told him. Not yelled. Told. Her voice was steady because his heartbeat wasn't. Cold, he muttered. I know. That's shock. We're compensating. Focus on my voice. The helicopter banked hard. Someone was shooting at them. Small arms fire that punched through the hull like angry wasps. The other operators returned fire with mechanical efficiency. Hana didn't even flinch. She'd learned to separate the sounds. Bullets you could hear meant they missed. The ones that killed you came too fast for your brain to process. BP dropping. The crew medic shouted over the rotor noise. Hana's hands moved faster. A procedure she'd performed 63 times in the field. A procedure most civilian surgeons had only read about. A procedure that required either perfect conditions or perfect desperation. She chose desperation. "Don't you dare die on me, Mitchell," she said. "I've got Thanksgiving dinner riding on this." He managed a weak laugh. She saved his life 11 minutes before they reached the forward surgical team. And 3 days later, he was rotated back to the States. She never learned his real name. Hana woke at 3 a.m. with her hands clenched into fists. The apartment was quiet except for the sound of her neighbor's TV through the wall, some late-night infomercial promising easy answers to hard problems. She unclenched her hands slowly, watching her fingers straighten in the darkness. They were steady now. They were always steady when no one was watching. That was the cruelest part. She didn't need to perform for herself. She only needed to perform for everyone else. And the performance was exhausting. Sunday's ER was chaos before Hana even clocked in. The waiting room overflowed with weekend casualties, a surfing accident from Malibu, a hiking injury from the Santa Monica Mountains, 3 separate car accidents from Highway 1's notorious curves. The kind of volume that turned organized medicine into barely controlled triage. "All hands on deck," the charge nurse announced. "We're in surge capacity protocols." Hana tied her hair back and dove in. For the first 4 hours, she moved through the ER like water, for placements, wound care, vital signs, patient transport. The work was mechanical enough to not require thought, complex enough to keep her hands busy. Dr. Reeves moved through the chaos with theatrical frustration, barking orders, and sighing dramatically whenever something wasn't instantly available. "Where's the portable X-ray?" he demanded at one point. "Park, did you call radiology?" "Yes, doctor. They're backed up. ETA 12 minutes. Unacceptable. This patient needs imaging now." Hana wanted to tell him that a 12-minute delay on a non-critical shoulder dislocation wasn't going to kill anyone. She wanted to remind him that radiology was handling a stroke patient and a pediatric seizure case. She wanted to explain resource allocation like he was a first-day intern. Instead, she said, "I'll follow up with them again." He turned away, already focused on something else. But then the radio crackled. "Harbor Crest, this is county fire. Multiple vehicle collision on Highway 1, near Point Dume. Advise of mass casualty event. 11 confirmed patients, unknown additional. First units en route to you with 3 critical." The ER transformed instantly. Mass casualty protocols activated. Staff materialized from break rooms and administrative offices. Trauma bays cleared. Equipment staged. The organized chaos that separated teaching hospitals from death traps. Hana felt something shift in her chest. A familiar tension, but not fear. Recognition. This was the kind of chaos she understood. The first ambulance arrived 8 minutes later. 26-year-old male, ejected from vehicle, GCS-7, massive facial trauma, possible C-spine injury. The paramedic rattled off while they transferred the patient. Hana took position at the bedside automatically, her hands moving to check airway, breathing, circulation, the holy trinity of trauma medicine. Dr. Reeves took charge with the practiced authority of someone who'd done this 100 times. "Get me an airway kit. Someone secure that C-spine. I need blood gas and a chest X-ray stat." The team moved efficiently. Organized. Professional. The second ambulance arrived 3 minutes later. 42-year-old female, restrained driver, stable vitals, but complaining of severe abdominal pain. The third ambulance 4 minutes after that. The ER became a symphony of controlled emergency. Voices calling out vital signs, equipment humming, monitors beeping their electronic songs of heartbeats and oxygen levels. Hana moved between patients, helping wherever hands were needed. And then she noticed something. Trauma Bay 4. A middle-aged man, maybe 55, sitting upright on the gurney. He was alert, speaking clearly to the resident, taking his history. Superficial abrasions on his arms. His primary complaint was a headache and some neck stiffness. Nothing immediately alarming. But something was wrong. Hana couldn't explain how she knew. It wasn't any single thing. It was the pattern. The way he held his head at a slightly odd angle. The subtle fullness in his neck. The way his breathing seemed just a fraction too deliberate, like he was thinking about each breath instead of just breathing. She moved closer, her eyes scanning the monitor above his bed. Blood pressure, 128/82. Normal. Heart rate, 88. Normal. Oxygen saturation, 96%. Low normal, but acceptable. "Excuse me," Hana said quietly to the resident. a second-year named Chun who looked about 16 years old. Has anyone examined his neck thoroughly? Chun glanced up from his tablet. Yeah, no obvious deformity. He's neurovascularly intact. Just some soft tissue swelling from the restraint. What about his voice? Does it sound normal to you? Chun looked annoyed at the interruption. He's talking fine. Look, we're slammed right now. This guy's stable. He can wait for CT. Hana hesitated. The old instinct was screaming at her. The training. The pattern recognition that came from seeing too many bodies break in too many ways. She looked at the patient again. His hand moved to his throat. Just for a second, an unconscious gesture. And his next breath whistled slightly. Dr. Reeves, Hana called across the ER. He was 3 bays away, managing the critical facial trauma case. Not now, Park. Doctor, I think we have an expanding hematoma in Bay 4. The patient needs immediate. Bay 4 is stable. Reeves shouted back. Focus on the critical patients. His breathing is deteriorating. He needs. He's talking clearly, Park. If he can talk, he can breathe. Reeves's voice carried that edge of frustration that meant further argument was professional suicide. Stop being paranoid and help with something that actually matters. Hana looked at the patient. His oxygen saturation had dropped to 94%, then 92%. His hand moved to his throat again, this time with more urgency. She had maybe 5 minutes before his airway completely compromised. Maybe less. In the field, this would be simple. She'd act. No hesitation. No permission needed. The team lead trusted her judgment because in combat, trust was the currency that bought survival. But this wasn't the field. This was a civilian hospital with protocols and hierarchies and lawyers and liability. And she was the quiet nurse who didn't know her place. The patient's eyes met hers, and in them, she saw the beginning of panic. The realization that something was very wrong, and he didn't know how to explain it. She'd seen that look before. Right before men stopped breathing. Hana made a decision. Dr. Chun, she said firmly, I need you to get Dr. Reeves or any available attending to this bay immediately. This patient is crashing. He's not crashing, he's. The monitor alarm began to blare. Oxygen saturation, 88%. The patient's hand clawed at his throat, his eyes wide, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. Get help. Now, Hana shouted. She didn't wait. Her hands moved with the kind of certainty that came from muscle memory older than thought. Assessing the neck, feeling the growing mass beneath the skin, calculating time and options, and the terrifying math of dying versus living. Dr. Reeves appeared at the bedside, finally registering the crisis. What the hell happened? Expanding hematoma, it's compressing his trachea. He needs an emergency airway now. Reeves grabbed the intubation kit, but Hana could see in his eyes what she already knew. Traditional intubation wouldn't work. The anatomy was distorted. The window was closing. The patient's lips were turning blue. And in that moment, Hana Park stopped being invisible. Move, she said. Not requested. Commanded. And for the first time in 3 months, her hands stopped shaking. Dr. Reeves didn't move. Excuse me. The patient's oxygen saturation hit 82%. His struggles were weakening, the worst sign. When they stopped fighting, they were seconds from unconsciousness. Unconsciousness meant cardiac arrest. Cardiac arrest in an unprotected airway meant brain death. Hana's training didn't ask permission. It just took over. She shouldered past Reeves, not aggressively, but with the economical movement of someone who'd worked in spaces too small for hesitation. Her hands moved to the equipment tray, selecting what she needed with the kind of precision that didn't require looking. Park, step back right now, or I'll have you removed from this. He has maybe 90 seconds before complete airway obstruction, Hana said, her voice carrying a flatness that came from separating emotion from action. Traditional intubation won't work. The hematomas displaced all the normal anatomy. He needs a surgical airway. You're not authorized to. Then authorize someone. Fast. But Reeves froze. Not from incompetence. He was probably technically capable. He froze because surgical airways in ERs were high-risk, high-liability procedures. The kind of thing that generated paperwork and lawsuits and career consequences if anything went wrong. The patient's eyes rolled back. Hana stopped waiting. I need betadine, a number 11 scalpel, and a 6.0 trach tube, she called out to the stunned nurse beside her. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried absolute authority. Dr. Reeves, if you're not going to do this, then bag him while I work. Someone needs to maintain airway pressure or he dies. For one suspended moment, everything hung in balance. Then the nurse, recognizing the calm competence of someone who actually knew what they were doing, handed Hana the equipment. Reeves grabbed the bag valve mask, his face flushed with rage but his hands moving because the alternative was watching a patient die. Hana's fingers palpated the patient's neck with careful precision, finding landmarks by feel. The swelling was significant, but not impossible. She'd done this in worse conditions. She'd done this in complete darkness with only her fingertips as guides. Keep bagging him, she instructed Reeves. Maintain pressure. She prepped the site with betadine in one efficient swipe. No time for sterile draping, no time for local anesthesia. Speed was survival. The scalpel felt familiar in her hand. One vertical incision through the skin and subcutaneous tissue. Clean. Confident. The kind of cut that came from knowing exactly how deep to go without seeing. Dark blood welled up. Venous, not arterial. Manageable. Her fingers spread the tissue, exposing the trachea below. The hematoma had pushed everything laterally, distorting the anatomy into something that would confuse a textbook surgeon. But Hana had stopped working from textbooks years ago. She'd learned emergency medicine from necessity, from the kind of teachers who paid tuition in blood and survival. Horizontal incision through the cricothyroid membrane, she narrated, partly for the benefit of the residents watching in stunned silence, partly because teaching was reflex. Between the thyroid and cricoid cartilage. Feel, don't look. Trust your fingers. The scalpel found the membrane, a tiny window of opportunity in a sea of swelling and distortion. One careful cut. The distinctive sound of air escaping through an opening that wasn't a mouth. That raw, visceral sound of a body finding an emergency exit. Hana inserted the trach tube with practiced efficiency, her fingers guiding it through the incision into the trachea below. Inflate the cuff, she said. The nurse did. Hana attached the bag valve mask to the trach tube and squeezed. The patient's chest rose. His oxygen saturation began climbing. 85%, 88%, 91%, 94%. The monitor's alarming stopped. The ER held its collective breath. The patient's color shifted from gray-blue back towards something resembling life. Hana's hands continued their work, securing the tube, applying sterile dressing, checking for bleeding. Her movements were economical, methodical, absolutely precise. She looked up at Dr. Reeves. His face was pale. His jaw clenched. His eyes held something between shock and fury. He needs surgical evaluation for the expanding hematoma, Hana said calmly, and ICU admission for airway monitoring. She stepped back from the bedside, her hands still steady, her pulse barely elevated. The patient was breathing. That was all that mattered. Dr. Chin stared at her like she'd just sprouted wings. Jennifer, who'd witnessed the entire thing from the nurse's station, looked like she'd swallowed glass. The other residents and nurses who'd gathered to watch the crisis unfold stood in various states of stunned silence. Hana stripped off her gloves and tossed them in the biohazard bin. Someone should notify surgery, she said to no one in particular. Then she walked away to wash her hands, leaving Dr. Reeves standing beside the patient whose life she'd just saved without permission. The rest of the shift passed in surreal silence. The mass casualty incident continued. More patients arrived. More traumas unfolded, but Hana felt a shift in the air around her. People stared. Conversations stopped when she approached. Whispers followed her like a shadow. She'd broken the most fundamental rule of hospital hierarchy. She'd been competent without permission. At 7 p.m., Dr. Reeves found her in the supply room where she was restocking 4 kits with mechanical focus. My office. Now. She followed him through the ER, past the nurse's station where Jennifer watched with barely concealed satisfaction, past the residents who suddenly found their shoes fascinating, past the patient in bay for who was now stable, intubated, and breathing because Hana had refused to let him die quietly. Reeves closed his office door with deliberate calm, then erupted. What the hell were you thinking? His voice was tight, controlled fury. You performed an emergency procedure without authorization. You overrode my medical judgment. You violated every protocol we have. Do you have any idea what you've done? I saved a patient's life. You endangered this entire department. Reeves slammed his hand on the desk. We have protocols for a reason, Park. We have hierarchies for a reason. You don't get to decide you know better than the attending physician. He was dying. He was stable. His airway was compromised. He had minutes before complete obstruction. You know that. You saw the monitor. Reeves's face flushed darker. I was managing the situation. I would have handled it. But you just, he struggled for words. You made me look incompetent in front of my entire staff. You undermined my authority. You put us at enormous liability risk. If anything had gone wrong, nothing went wrong. That's not the point. Hana looked at him directly for the first time in 3 months. Really looked at him and saw clearly what she'd been avoiding seeing. He wasn't angry because she'd violated protocol. He was angry because she'd been right. Because she'd done something he couldn't do, or wouldn't do, or was too afraid to do. Because in that moment, his authority meant nothing compared to competence. What's the point then, Dr. Reeves? Hana's voice was quiet but steady. That saving lives matters less than following orders? That patients should die politely rather than survive inconveniently? Don't you dare make this about. I'm a nurse, Hana interrupted. I understand my place in the hierarchy. I understand protocols. But I also understand something else. Every regulation, every rule, every protocol we follow exists for one reason: to give patients the best chance of survival. And when those protocols become obstacles instead of tools, someone has to remember what we're actually here for. Reeves stared at her like she was speaking a foreign language. You're fired. The words landed like stones. Effective immediately. Turn in your badge. Clean out your locker. I'll have security escort you out if necessary. Hana nodded slowly. She'd expected this. In some ways, she'd invited it. The patient in Bay 4, she said quietly. Make sure surgery evaluates him within the hour. The hematoma will likely continue expanding. And keep him sedated. He'll panic when he wakes up intubated. Someone should explain what happened before he becomes fully conscious. She turned to leave. Park. She paused. How did you know? Reeves's voice had lost its fury, replaced by something else. Confusion, maybe. How did you see what no one else saw? How did you do that procedure like you'd done it 1,000 times? Hana looked back at him. For a moment, she almost told him the truth. About the helicopters, the gunfire, the men who'd bled out in her arms while she worked miracles with nothing but gauze and determination. About the training that made civilian emergency medicine look like choreographed theater. About the woman she'd been before she decided that quiet normalcy was safer than excellence. But what would be the point? He wouldn't understand. None of them would. Experience, she said finally. Then she left his office for the last time. The locker room was empty at 7:30 p.m. Hana stood before her locker, number 47, lower left corner, and stared at the small metal door like it held answers instead of just worn scrubs and an empty lunch container. Her badge felt heavy in her hand. She'd worn it for 93 days. 3 months of invisibility. 3 months of swallowing words and shrinking her capabilities and pretending that competence was weakness. And it had all ended the moment she remembered who she actually was. She opened the locker slowly. The contents were sparse. She'd never personalized it. No photos, no decorations, no evidence of a life outside these walls. Just practical things. An extra pair of shoes, a sweatshirt for cold shifts, chapstick, hand lotion for skin destroyed by constant washing, a protein bar she'd forgotten to eat. She packed them into her bag with methodical precision. Behind her, the locker room door opened. I heard. Jennifer's voice carried false sympathy. About what happened with Reeves. Hana didn't turn around. That was quite a show you put on out there. Jennifer continued, moving closer. Very dramatic. Very heroic. I wasn't trying to be heroic. No. Jennifer laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Could have fooled everyone. You made Reeves look like an idiot. Made all of us look like we didn't know what we were doing. Very impressive for someone who supposedly can't handle pressure. Hana closed her locker door with a soft click. I hope you're proud of yourself, Jennifer said, her voice hardening. You saved one patient. Congratulations. But you destroyed your career, broke about a dozen hospital policies, and burned every bridge you had here. All for what? To prove that the quiet little Korean nurse wasn't so quiet after all. Hana turned slowly. Jennifer stood 3 feet away, arms crossed, her face twisted into something that looked like victory. You were right about me, Hana said quietly. I'm not built for civilian trauma work. Jennifer blinked, surprised. What? I'm used to working in places where protocols mattered less than outcomes. where hierarchies dissolved in the face of necessity, where the only question that mattered was, are they still breathing? Hana shouldered her bag. This world has different rules. I forgot that. My mistake. She moved toward the door. That's it. Jennifer's voice rose. No dramatic speech. No righteous anger. You're just going to leave? Hana paused at the threshold. What would be the point? She looked back at Jennifer. You wanted me gone. Reeves wanted me gone. I was never going to survive here. We all knew that from day one. Because you couldn't handle the pressure. No. Hana's voice was so quiet it barely carried across the room. Because I handled it too well. She left Jennifer standing in the locker room, confusion replacing triumph on her face. The parking lot was cold in the evening air. The California coast fog was rolling in, thick, gray, carrying the smell of salt and kelp. Hana sat in her car for exactly 5 minutes. But this time, her decompression ritual felt different. The weight wasn't there. The suffocation. The constant effort of being less than she was. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, perfectly steady. She'd been fired. Her career at Harbor Crest was over. She'd have to explain this on every future job application. The nurse who violated protocols, who undermined authority, who couldn't follow orders. But a man was still breathing. That was the math she understood. That was the only math that had ever made sense. Her phone buzzed. The same unknown number from before. You left something behind. This time, there was a second message. You know what I'm talking about. Hana stared at the screen. She didn't know. She'd left behind the only version of herself that had ever felt entirely true. The operator. The combat medic. The woman who moved through chaos like water, who made impossible decisions in impossible circumstances, who kept people alive because that was the only job that mattered. She'd traded that for safety. For normalcy. For the lie that she could be ordinary. A third message appeared. Tomorrow. 0600, you'll understand. Hana started her car and drove home through fog so thick the streetlights were just halos of diffused light. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat on her apartment floor and did something she hadn't done in 6 months. She unpacked the box. It was buried in the back of her closet, sealed with tape and denial. Inside were things from her previous life. Medals she'd earned but couldn't display, commendations with redacted names, photos of people whose faces she could remember but whose identities she'd sworn to protect, a tactical medical kit that still smelled faintly of dust and blood. At the bottom was a patch. Black background. A red cross. Words stitched in silver thread. Death waits for no one, but I'll make him. It had been her team's unofficial motto. She held it in her hands and felt something crack open in her chest. Not breaking, but opening. Like a door she'd sealed shut was finally admitting light again. Maybe Jennifer was right. Maybe she had destroyed her career for one patient. But that patient had children. A wife. A life that would have ended on a Tuesday evening because protocols mattered more than pattern recognition. And maybe, just maybe, that was worth it. At 5:30 a.m., Hana dressed in running clothes and drove back to Harbor Crest. She didn't know why. She just knew that the message had said 0600, and her entire military career had trained her that when someone gave you coordinates and a time, you showed up. The hospital parking lot was nearly empty in the pre-dawn darkness. She parked and waited. At precisely 6 a.m., she heard it. The distant thump of rotor blades cutting through morning air. Growing louder. Closer. And then she saw it. A Sikorsky UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter, military gray, descending toward the hospital's rooftop helipad like a predator that owned the sky. The rotor wash sent waves of pressure rippling through the parking lot, strong enough to rock her car on its suspension. Hana stepped out of the vehicle, her heart rate elevating for the first time in hours. The helicopter landed with practiced precision. Armed personnel in tactical gear emerged, moving with the economical efficiency of operators who'd done this 1,000 times. And through the fog and rotor wash, a figure approached her car. Tall, broad shoulders, the kind of walk that came from carrying weight and responsibility. He stopped 3 feet away and looked at her with eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. "Doc," he said simply. Hana's breath caught. She knew that voice. "Mitchell." He smiled, scarred but genuine. "Surprised?" You're alive. Because of you." He gestured toward the helicopter. "We need to talk. And you need to come with me." Behind him, more figures emerged from the helicopter. SEALs, she recognized instantly. The way they moved. The way they assessed threats. The way they existed in the world like weapons with heartbeats. Why? Hana asked. Because yesterday, you saved a man's life in a civilian hospital using skills that aren't supposed to exist outside classified operations. Mitchell's expression turned serious. You broke cover. And now some people need to understand who you are and what you can do. I'm nobody. That's what we trained you to be. He glanced back at the helicopter. But yesterday, you reminded everyone that invisible doesn't mean powerless. The SEAL community takes care of its own. Document. Always. Even the ones who try to walk away. The rotor blades continued their rhythmic thumping, each rotation marking time like a heartbeat. Hana looked up at the hospital, at the building where she'd spent 3 months trying to be ordinary, trying to fit into a world that had no space for what she actually was. Then she looked at the helicopter, at the machine that represented everything she'd left behind. I'm not going back, she said quietly. I'm done with war. We're not asking you to go back. Mitchell's voice softened. We're asking you to come home. Just for today. Just to answer some questions and help some people understand something important. What's that? That the woman who saved lives in Kandahar and Mogadishu and a dozen other places no one will ever know about didn't stop being that woman just because she put on civilian scrubs. Hana's hands, for the first time in hours, began to shake. Not from fear. From recognition. Okay, she said finally. Okay. She followed Mitchell across the parking lot toward the helicopter, its rotors still spinning, its crew waiting. And behind her, on the 3rd floor of Harbor Crest Medical Center, Dr. Nolan Reeves stood at his office window and watched the impossible scene unfold below. Watched his fired nurse board a military helicopter like she belonged there. Watched armed personnel treat her not with fear, but with respect. Watched the aircraft lift off and disappear into the morning fog. And realized he'd made a terrible miscalculation about who Hana Park actually was. The Black Hawk's interior was exactly as Hana remembered. The smell of avgas and metal. The vibration that rattled through your teeth. The red lighting that preserved night vision even in daytime. The familiar sensation of controlled chaos that came from trusting machines and pilots with your life. Mitchell handed her a headset. We're taking you to Naval Base Coronado. His voice crackled through the comms. 30-minute flight. Just relax. Relax. As if boarding a military helicopter at dawn was casual Tuesday behavior. Across from her sat 3 other SEALs. She recognized the look even if she didn't know their faces. The weathered competence, the calm assessment, the 1,000-yard stare that came from seeing too much too young. One of them caught her eye and nodded. She nodded back. No words needed. They understood what she was. She understood what they were. The helicopter banked hard, heading south along the California coast. Through the open door, Hana watched Harbor Crest Medical Center shrink into the distance. From this height, it looked insignificant, just another building among thousands, no more important than anything else. The irony wasn't lost on her. 3 months she'd spent trying to be invisible there. It took one military helicopter to make the entire hospital notice. You disappeared, Mitchell said through the headset. 6 months ago. No warning. No explanation. Command said you'd requested discharge for personal reasons. Medical separation. Clean record. Honorable. But everyone knew something was off. Hana stared at the coastline sliding past below. I was tired. Bullshit. She looked at him. Mitchell's face was serious. I've seen tired. Hell, I've been tired. Tired doesn't make someone as good as you walk away completely. Tired takes leave. Tired rotates stateside. Tired doesn't vanish into civilian life like they never existed. What do you want me to say? The truth would be nice. Hana was quiet for a long moment. I killed someone, she said finally. The helicopter's interior suddenly felt smaller. In the field? Mitchell asked carefully. No. After. Hana's voice was flat. A patient. Someone I should have saved. We were in the Hindu Kush. Extraction gone bad. 3 casualties. I was working on an operator with a sucking chest wound when the second casualty started crashing. I had to choose. Triage. That's the job, right? You choose who has the best chance, and you focus there. That's the job, Mitchell confirmed. I chose wrong. Hana's hands clenched. The guy I was working on? He lived. The guy I didn't prioritize? He bled out in 8 minutes because I wasn't fast enough to stabilize the first one and switch. I made a call. It was the right call by every protocol. By every standard of combat medicine. But he still died. And I realized something. What? That I was good at making those choices. Too good. It didn't bother me the way it should have. The math was just math. The casualties were just casualties. And I looked at myself in a mirror after that mission and didn't recognize what I'd become. Mitchell nodded slowly. So you left. So I left. To become what? A civilian nurse who takes orders and blends in and pretends she doesn't know how to save lives better than most surgeons. To become normal, Hana said quietly. To become someone who felt things again instead of just calculating survival percentages. How's that working out? Hana laughed, a raw, bitter sound that was almost swallowed by the helicopter noise. I got fired yesterday for saving someone's life. Because you were too competent. Because I wouldn't stay invisible. Mitchell leaned forward, his voice carrying something she couldn't quite identify. You know what the operators say about you? The ones who served with you? They call you the angel. Not because you're nice or soft, or any of that bullshit. But because when everything went wrong, when the bullets were flying and the blood was spraying and hope was gone, you showed up. You were there. And you didn't panic, didn't hesitate, didn't fail. You just worked. And guys who should have died came home. I'm not an angel. No, Mitchell agreed. You're something better. You're a professional who cares enough to be perfect. That's rarer than you think. The helicopter began its descent. Through the window, Hana could see Naval Base Coronado taking shape below, the sprawling complex where SEALs trained, lived, and prepared for operations that would never make the news. She'd been here before, years ago, during initial training, back when she'd been trying to prove she belonged. Now she wasn't sure where she belonged at all. The Black Hawk touched down on a helipad near the medical training facility. The rotors began slowing, their rhythm decelerating from urgent to patient. Mitchell removed his headset. Ready? For what? To remember what you're actually good at. They walked across the tarmac toward a nondescript building with high security and no windows. Inside, the air was cool and sterile. Medical equipment lined the walls. Everything from basic field kits to advanced surgical tools that belonged in operating rooms, not tactical environments. A man waited for them in the main training room. He was maybe 55, gray-haired, with the kind of eyes that had seen entire careers come and go. 2 stars on his collar. A rear admiral. Someone important. Senior Chief Park, he said. Thank you for coming. Hana blinked. She hadn't been called that rank in 6 months. Sir, I'm not active duty anymore. We're aware. He gestured to a chair. Sit. Please. This isn't about reactivation. It's about clarification. She sat. The Admiral settled across from her, his posture relaxed but his attention absolute. Yesterday evening, he began, we received an interesting phone call from Harbor Crest Medical Center. Dr. Nolan Reeves, the head of their trauma department, wanted to file a formal complaint about a former nurse who violated protocols, undermined medical authority, and performed an unauthorized procedure. He wanted us to investigate whether this former nurse had somehow obtained classified medical training she shouldn't have access to. Hana said nothing. Imagine his surprise, the Admiral continued, when our background check revealed that the quiet Korean nurse he'd fired was actually a decorated special operations medical specialist with 5 years of Tier 1 combat experience, 3 Bronze Stars, and a classified record that makes most trauma surgeons look like first-year interns. I didn't tell them because it wasn't relevant. Wasn't relevant. The Admiral's eyebrows rose. You're one of the most highly trained combat medics this country has ever produced. You've saved lives in conditions that would make most civilian doctors quit. And you let some peacetime hospital doctor treat you like you didn't know what you were doing. I wanted to be normal. Why? Hana looked at her hands. Because I was tired of being good at death. The room was silent for a moment. Here's the situation, the Admiral finally said. Dr. Reeves is threatening legal action. He's claiming you practiced medicine beyond your scope, that you put the hospital at liability risk, that your mysterious skills represent some kind of security breach. He's wrong on all counts. You were credentialed for exactly what you did, both as a nurse and as a medical professional with advanced military training. But he's loud, he's connected, and he's embarrassed. So what happens now? Now we protect you. The Admiral stood. We're sending a team back to Harbor Crest. They're going to explain, politely but firmly, exactly who you are and why Dr. Reeves's complaint is not only baseless but insulting. They're going to make it very clear that you didn't violate any protocols. You just happen to be significantly more qualified than anyone in that building realized. That sounds like it will make things worse. It will make things clear, the Admiral corrected. The SEAL community takes care of its own. You saved lives for us. Now we return the favor. Mitchell stepped forward. Doc, they're not trying to force you back. They're trying to protect you from people who don't understand what you can do or why it matters. That's it. The Admiral nodded. You can go back to civilian life if that's what you want. But you'll go back with your record intact and your reputation protected. No one gets to diminish what you've accomplished. Not some hospital administrator. Not anyone. Hana felt something tighten in her chest. For 3 months, she'd absorbed disrespect like it was deserved. She'd accepted mockery as the price of normalcy. She'd let people who knew less treat her like she knew nothing. Because that's what invisibility required. But maybe invisibility wasn't the same as healing. Maybe hiding who she was didn't make her more human. It just made her less of everything. Thank you, sir, she said quietly. Don't thank me yet, the Admiral replied. Because there's one more thing. We need you to do something before you leave here. Something important. What? He walked to a corner of the training room and pulled a sheet off a medical dummy. But not the standard training kind. This one was sophisticated, with realistic tissue, simulated injuries, and monitoring equipment that mimicked real human responses. There's a new group of special operations medics graduating in 2 weeks, the Admiral explained. Young, talented, technically proficient. But they lack something crucial. They lack the understanding of what real crisis looks like. What real pressure feels like. What it actually means to keep someone alive when everything is falling apart. He turned to face her. We want you to teach them. Not permanently. Just for today. Show them what you showed that ER yesterday. Show them what excellence under pressure actually means. Hana stared at the medical dummy. I'm not a teacher. You're exactly a teacher, Mitchell said. You just taught an entire emergency room what competence looks like. Now teach the people who actually deserve to learn from you. The Admiral checked his watch. The class starts in 20 minutes. You can decline. No pressure, no consequences. Walk out that door and go back to whatever civilian life you're building. Or you can stay for a few hours and remind yourself what you're actually good at. Hana stood slowly. She walked over to the medical dummy, her fingers automatically assessing the simulated injuries, calculating priorities, organizing the chaos of trauma into manageable steps. Her hands didn't shake. They never shook when the work was real. Okay, she said. Okay, I'll teach them. Mitchell smiled. There she is. And for the first time in 6 months, Hana Park stopped trying to be ordinary. The Black Hawk returned to Harbor Crest Medical Center at 1,400 hours. This time, it didn't land on the roof. It descended directly into the parking lot, rotors thundering, downdrafts sending papers and leaves spiraling into chaos, the kind of arrival that didn't apologize for demanding attention. Every window on the trauma side of the hospital filled with faces. Dr. Reeves watched from his office, his phone already in his hand, already composing the furious call to security, already preparing the speech about unauthorized military vehicles and hospital property and professional boundaries. Then the side door opened. 8 personnel emerged. Not soldiers, these were officers. 2 wore Navy uniforms with enough brass to fund a small war. 1 wore the insignia of Naval Special Warfare Command. The rest were SEALs, moving with that predatory efficiency that made civilians instinctively step back. And in the center of the group, wearing borrowed Navy utilities that actually fit her, walked Hana Park. She looked different. Her posture had changed, not slouched or deferential anymore, but straight, confident. The body language of someone who knew exactly what they were capable of and felt no need to apologize for it. Her hair was still pulled back, but tighter, more functional. The style of someone preparing for work, not hiding from attention. Her eyes scanned the building with the kind of tactical assessment that came from training most people didn't survive. The group walked directly through the emergency room entrance. Doors didn't stop them. Staff scattered. Security guards took one look at the SEAL officers and decided their paycheck wasn't worth asking questions. Within 30 seconds, the entire group stood in the ER central hub. Where's Dr. Reeves? The Rear Admiral asked, his voice carrying absolute authority. A nurse, not Jennifer, someone junior, pointed toward the administrative wing with a shaking hand. Get him. Now. 2 minutes later, Dr. Nolan Reeves arrived, his face flushed, his posture aggressive. What is the meaning of this? You can't just land a military helicopter on civilian. Dr. Reeves. The Admiral's voice cut through the bluster like a scalpel. I'm Rear Admiral James Halsey, Naval Special Warfare Command. This is Commander Torres, legal counsel for Special Operations personnel. We're here regarding your complaint about former Navy Senior Chief Petty Officer Hana Park. Reeves blinked. Senior Chief? Senior Chief Park served 5 years as a Special Operations medical specialist attached to SEAL team operations throughout the Pacific and Middle Eastern theaters. She holds advanced trauma certification beyond anything taught in civilian medical schools. She's participated in over 300 combat operations and maintained a patient survival rate that exceeds 93% in field conditions where most trauma surgeons would fail completely. The ER had gone silent. Every nurse, every resident, every tech who'd dismissed Hana as weak or incompetent now stood frozen. Jennifer's face had gone pale. So when you called us yesterday, the Admiral continued, complaining that she'd overstepped her authority by performing an emergency thoracotomy, a procedure she's performed successfully 73 times in active combat. We were confused. Because from our perspective, Senior Chief Park didn't overstep anything. She simply applied her training to save a patient's life. Reeves opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. She never told us. She didn't tell you because her service was partially classified. Because operators like her are trained to maintain operational security. Because the men she kept alive were engaged in missions you don't have clearance to know about. The Admiral stepped closer. But more than that, Dr. Reeves, she didn't tell you because she was trying to fit into your world. She was trying to be normal. And you made that impossible by treating exceptional competence as insubordination. I didn't know. You didn't ask. Commander Torres pulled out a tablet. We have documentation here showing that Senior Chief Park's credentials were valid for every procedure performed in your ER. We have testimony from the patient she saved, Mr. David Chun, 42-year-old father of 3, who stated that his treating physician had dismissed his symptoms until Nurse Park insisted on intervention. We have video footage from your own security system showing that she acted with appropriate medical judgment under time-critical circumstances. Mitchell stepped forward, his voice calm but carrying weight. I'm Chief Petty Officer Mitchell Connor. 3 years ago, I took shrapnel from an IED outside Kandahar. My femoral artery was severed. I was bleeding out. The medical transport was 30 minutes away. He looked directly at Reeves. Senior Chief Park performed an emergency arterial repair in a helicopter taking small arms fire. She saved my life. And the 6 operators after me. And the dozen operators before me. She's the reason we came home. Another SEAL spoke up. Lieutenant Marcus Webb. Mogadishu, 2018. Gunshot wound to the chest, collapsed lung. Doc Park performed a needle decompression and chest tube insertion while we were under active fire. I'm alive because she doesn't panic. Because she doesn't hesitate. Because she's better at her job than anyone I've ever seen. A third SEAL. Petty Officer Sarah Chun. Classified location, classified year. Multiple casualties, limited supplies, no backup. Doc Park performed triage and treatment for 7 wounded operators using nothing but a field medical kit and absolute mastery of emergency medicine. 0 deaths. 0 permanent disabilities. She's a legend in the SEAL community. And you fired her for being too good. The ER staff stood in stunned silence. Hana remained still, her expression neutral, her posture military. She wasn't uncomfortable with the attention. She was just present. Existing without apology. Dr. Reeves looked like someone had replaced his reality with a completely different one. I didn't know. You didn't know because you never asked, the Admiral said flatly. You saw a quiet Korean woman and assumed weakness. You saw hesitation, which was actually restraint, and labeled it inadequacy. You created an environment where one of this country's most valuable medical professionals felt she had to hide her capabilities to avoid your ego. The Admiral turned to address the entire ER. Let me be clear about something. Senior Chief Park doesn't need this hospital. She doesn't need validation from civilian medicine. She left active duty because she wanted quiet. Because she wanted normal. Because after years of keeping men alive in the worst conditions imaginable, she thought maybe she could heal without quite so much blood. And you, he looked back at Reeves, you mistook that choice for inability. I apologize, Reeves stammered. I didn't understand. Your apology is irrelevant. Commander Torres stepped forward. We're here to ensure that Senior Chief Park's record is corrected, her termination is rescinded with full back pay, and her reputation is restored. Additionally, we're recommending that Harbor Crest implement training on how to recognize and respect military medical professionals transitioning to civilian practice. Of course, absolutely, we can. We're not asking, Torres said quietly. We're informing. The Admiral looked at Hana. Senior Chief, do you want your job back? The entire ER held its breath. Hana stood silent for a long moment. She looked at Dr. Reeves, at the man who'd dismissed her, belittled her, fired her. She looked at Jennifer, at the nurse who'd mocked her, undermined her, celebrated her downfall. She looked at the residents who'd ignored her input, the techs who'd whispered about her, the staff who'd treated her like she was invisible. Then she looked at Mitchell, at the SEALs, at the people who understood what she actually was and valued it without qualification. No, she said clearly. I don't want it back. Shock rippled through the room. You don't? The Admiral asked. No, sir. Hana's voice was steady. Because I realized something today. I left the military trying to find normalcy. But normal isn't the same as valuable. I spent 3 months making myself smaller so I could fit into a world that didn't appreciate what I could do. And yesterday, I stopped fitting. I don't want to go back to that. Then what do you want? Hana turned to face the ER, all of it. The equipment, the staff, the space where she'd spent 93 days being less than herself. I want to teach, she said. I want to train people who actually need what I know. Not people who'll dismiss it. Not people who'll reduce it. People who understand that keeping someone alive is the only thing that matters. I want to go back to Coronado and help train the next generation of special operations medics. Because that's where my skills actually matter. That's where excellence isn't threatening. It's essential. The Admiral smiled. We were hoping you'd say that. The position is already approved, Commander Torres added. If you accept, you'll be the lead instructor for advanced tactical trauma care at Naval Special Warfare Center. Full civilian salary, full benefits, and the respect you actually deserve. Hana felt something settle in her chest. Not peace exactly, but recognition. She'd spent 6 months running from who she was. And one day remembering. I accept, she said. Mitchell grinned. Welcome home document. The SEALs, all of them, snapped to attention and saluted. Not the casual respect of colleagues. The full, formal acknowledgement of someone whose service had earned permanent debt. Hana returned the salute, her movements crisp and certain. Then she turned back to Dr. Reeves one final time. The patient in Bay 4, she said. Mr. David Chun. Make sure someone follows up on his recovery. Make sure his family knows what happened and why. And make sure that the next time someone tries to tell you something important, you actually listen. Because competence doesn't always look the way you expect it to. She walked out of Harbor Crest Medical Center flanked by SEALs, her posture straight, her purpose clear. The helicopter was waiting. And behind her, in the stunned silence of the ER, Dr. Nolan Reeves finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. He hadn't fired an incompetent nurse. He'd fired a national asset. And she'd chosen to leave anyway. 3 days later, Coronado Naval Base's medical training facility was packed. 26 special operations medics sat in stadium-style seating around a central surgical theater. Young faces, hard eyes, the kind of people who'd volunteered for the hardest job in the hardest community because they wanted to matter. Hana stood at the surgical table, her hands bare, her expression calm. Behind her, a massive screen displayed vital signs from the training mannequin, a sophisticated simulator that could replicate injuries, responses, and complications with disturbing realism. Good morning, she said. No amplification needed. Her voice carried authority. I'm Senior Chief Park. Some of you may have heard stories. Forget them. Stories don't save lives. Training does. Repetition does. Absolute mastery of fundamentals under the worst conditions imaginable does. The room was silent. Today we're going to discuss something most of you hope you'll never encounter. A thoracotomy in the field. Emergency chest surgery. The kind of procedure that requires you to crack someone's ribs open, reach inside, and manually manipulate their heart to keep them alive. It's violent. It's brutal. And it's occasionally the only option left. She activated the mannequin. Immediately, alarms began blaring. The simulator's patient crashed, heart rate plummeting, blood pressure dropping, oxygen saturation falling into critical ranges. This is a penetrating chest trauma, Hana explained, her hands already moving to assess the dummy. Bullet wound to the left thorax. Massive hemothorax. The patient is an extremis. Standard interventions have failed. You have approximately 90 seconds before cardiac arrest becomes irreversible. Her movements were economical. Precise. Assessment first. Always assessment. ABC. Airway, breathing, circulation. What's compromised? All three, a young medic called out. Correct. Priority. Circulation. He's bleeding out. Correct. Time to make a decision. Hana pulled on gloves with practiced efficiency. You can continue with standard protocols. Chest tube, for fluids, rapid transport. Or you can acknowledge that standard protocols won't work and do something most doctors never do outside of actual operating rooms. She picked up a scalpel. I'm choosing the second option. Watch carefully. This procedure has a low survival rate, even in perfect conditions. In the field, with limited equipment and enemy fire overhead, the survival rate drops to nearly zero. But zero is not the same as impossible. She made the incision, a dramatic, sweeping cut from sternum to mid-axillary line. The kind of incision that would make a civilian surgeon hesitate. The kind of incision that committed you completely. Rib spreaders, she called. A senior instructor handed her the tool. She cranked the ribs apart. Mechanical separation that looked violent, but was necessary. The mannequin's internal structures became visible on the simulation screen. Here's the problem, Hana said, her hands moving inside the chest cavity with confidence that came from repetition. Massive bleeding. Torn vessels. The heart is struggling. In 60 seconds, it will stop. Your job is to buy time. Clamp the aorta. Relieve the pressure. Give the heart a chance to restart. Her fingers found the aorta, a simulated structure that felt realistic enough to be disturbing. She clamped it with practiced precision. The simulator's vitals stabilized slightly. Now cardiac massage. Direct manual compression. You're going to squeeze their heart in your hand until it starts beating properly again, or until you can get them to actual surgical care. She demonstrated, her hand wrapping around the simulated heart, compressing in rhythm, forcing blood through a system that had given up. 30 seconds passed. 60. 90. The simulator's heart rhythm began to strengthen. There, Hana said. That's the moment that matters. When something that should be dead decides to keep fighting. Your job is to give them that moment. Your job is to refuse to accept death as inevitable. She looked up at the class. I've performed this procedure 8 times in the field. 6 patients survived. 2 didn't. The ones who lived did so because I didn't hesitate, didn't doubt, didn't waste time hoping for better options. The ones who died because sometimes perfect execution isn't enough. Sometimes the injuries are too severe. Sometimes you do everything right and they still slip away. Her voice softened slightly. But you try anyway. Every single time. Because the alternative is letting them die without fighting. And that's not acceptable. She stepped back from the mannequin. Now you try. One by one. You're going to perform this procedure until your hands know it better than your own name. Until you can do it in complete darkness. Until you can do it while someone is shooting at you. Until hesitation is physically impossible. The medics stood, their expressions a mixture of intimidation and determination. For the next 6 hours, Hana walked them through the procedure repeatedly. She corrected grips, adjusted angles, demonstrated alternative approaches. She didn't coddle, didn't praise unnecessarily, didn't accept anything less than competence. She was exactly the teacher she'd needed years ago. Demanding. Precise. Unwilling to let students fail through lack of preparation. At 1800 hours, the training session ended. The medics filed out, exhausted but visibly transformed. Admiral Halsey approached from where he'd been observing. That was extraordinary, he said. That was necessary, Hana corrected. You're a natural instructor. I'm someone who's seen what happens when training isn't good enough. She stripped off her gloves. If I can make them 1% better, that's 1% more operators who come home. That's the only math that matters. Halsey nodded slowly. We made the right decision bringing you back. I didn't come back, Hana said. I just stopped running. She looked at the surgical theater, at the mannequin still lying open on the table, its simulated chest cavity exposed, its artificial heart still beating because she'd made it beat. This was where she belonged. Not hiding in civilian hospitals, pretending to be ordinary. Not shrinking her capabilities to fit someone else's expectations. Here, teaching people who would use what she taught to save lives that mattered. There's one more thing, Halsey said. Tomorrow morning, you have a visitor. Someone from your civilian life. Specifically requested to see you. Who? Mr. David Chun. The patient you saved at Harbor Crest. He insisted on thanking you personally. Hana felt something catch in her throat. That's not necessary. Maybe not, Halsey agreed. But sometimes people need to say thank you to the person who gave them more years with their family. Sometimes that matters more than protocol or military efficiency. Sometimes the human part is what makes all of this worthwhile. David Chun arrived at 0900 hours with his wife and 3 children. He looked healthy, color good, breathing normal, the kind of ordinary vitality that would have been impossible without the emergency intervention Hana had performed. They met in a conference room overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Senior Chief Park, David said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm alive because of you. His wife stepped forward. We're all here because of you. Our kids still have a father. I still have my husband. Because you saw what no one else saw and acted when no one else would. Hana felt deeply uncomfortable with the gratitude. I was doing my job. No, David said firmly. You were doing more than your job. The doctors at Harbor Crest told me what happened. How you tried to warn them. How they ignored you. How you saved my life anyway. Even though it cost you your position. That's not just doing a job. That's caring about people more than consequences. His oldest child, a girl maybe 8 years old, stepped forward shyly and handed Hana a drawing. It showed a hospital, a stick figure labeled Nurse Hana, and a family holding hands under a rainbow. Thank you for saving my daddy, the girl said quietly. Hana took the drawing with hands that finally, genuinely, trembled. Not from restraint. From feeling too much all at once. You're welcome, she managed. They stayed for 30 minutes, talking, laughing, existing as the living proof that medical excellence mattered. That protocols were guidelines, not absolutes. That sometimes one person refusing to accept death made all the difference. When they left, Hana stood alone in the conference room, holding a child's drawing and feeling the weight of choices that had seemed so simple just days ago. Mitchell found her there. Heavy day? Yeah. That's the job, he said quietly. We see the result of our work. Most military people don't. We drop bombs or fire bullets and never know what happens after. But you keep people alive and then they come back to thank you. That's got to be strange. It is. Worth it though. Hana looked at the drawing. At the family holding hands. At the proof that her refusal to stay quiet had mattered. Yeah, worth it. Mitchell leaned against the window. Admiral has an offer for you. Something beyond the instructor position. What? They want to create a new program. Advanced tactical medicine for special operations. Not just SEALs, all special forces. Delta, Rangers, PJs, Marine Raiders. A comprehensive training pipeline for keeping operators alive in the absolute worst conditions. They want you to design it, run it, teach it. Hana turned to face him. That's a huge responsibility. You're the only person qualified, Mitchell said simply. The only one who has the field experience, the teaching ability, and the respect of the community. It would be full-time, high-level position. You'd report directly to SOCOM commanders. Real authority, real impact. That sounds like going back to war. No, Mitchell corrected. It sounds like preventing war from killing the people we send into it. There's a difference. Hana walked to the window, looking out at the ocean where Navy SEALs trained in the surf, where helicopters practiced insertions and extractions, where the machinery of warfare prepared for things civilians would never see. What if I'm not ready? She asked quietly. What if I walked away for good reasons? What if I'm broken in ways that teaching can't fix? Then you'll be broken while making sure other people don't break the same way, Mitchell said. That's still worth something. Is it? Doc. Mitchell's voice carried weight. I'm not going to tell you what to choose. This is your life. Your decision. But I will tell you something true. Every operator who's ever worked with you, every single one, remembers you. Not because you're some superhero, but because when shit went sideways and death was one mistake away, you were there. Steady, competent, refusing to quit. That presence, that absolute commitment to keeping people alive, that's what we need more of, not less. Hana was quiet for a long moment. If I do this, she finally said, I do it my way. Not military bureaucracy, not political considerations. I teach what works. I cut what doesn't. I prepare these medics for actual reality, not sanitized training scenarios. No compromise. No watering down the truth to make it comfortable. That's exactly why we want you. And I want full authority to bring in instructors I trust. To design curriculum that reflects actual field conditions. To fail students who aren't good enough, even if someone important wants them to pass. Done. And I want to remember something, Hana said, looking at the drawing still in her hands. I want to remember that these skills aren't abstract. That every technique I teach, every procedure I perfect, every medic I train, all of it exists to give families like the Chins more time together. That has to be the point. Not warfare. Not tactics. Not military glory. Just keeping people alive long enough to go home. Mitchell smiled. I think you're going to be perfect for this job. 6 months later, the first class graduated from Senior Chief Park's Advanced Tactical Medicine program. The ceremony was small, attended only by the medics themselves, their chain of command, and a handful of operators who'd survived because someone like Hana had been there when it mattered. Hana stood before the 20 graduates, holding a patch she'd designed for the program. Black background, red cross, silver words, death waits for no one, but we'll make him. You're not heroes, she told them. Heroes are people who do extraordinary things once. You're going to be something more important. You're going to be professionals who do extraordinary things every single time, who refuse to accept death as inevitable, who keep fighting when everyone else has given up. She handed out the patches one by one. You're going to see terrible things. You're going to lose patients you should have saved. You're going to doubt yourselves on the bad days and wonder if this work matters. On those days, remember this. Somewhere, a child is drawing a picture of their family. A husband is going home to his wife. A father is teaching his daughter to ride a bike. All of those moments exist because someone like you refused to quit. The graduates stood at attention, their patches in hand, their eyes carrying the weight of responsibility they'd just accepted. That's the job, Hana said. Keep them alive. Everything else is secondary. They saluted. She returned it. And somewhere on the California coast, at a hospital where she'd once tried to be invisible, Dr. Nolan Reeves stood in his office and looked at a letter from Naval Special Warfare Command thanking Harbor Crest for temporarily hosting one of our nation's most valuable medical assets. He set the letter down and stared out at the ocean, finally understanding what everyone else had learned. That excellence didn't need to announce itself. It just needed the chance to work. And Hana Park, the quiet nurse who shook sometimes, who seemed overwhelmed by alarms, who everyone had dismissed as too soft for trauma, was exactly where she belonged. Teaching people how to save lives. Refusing to accept death as the final answer. Being extraordinary without apology. And that was enough. The end.